Long before people understood childhood behavior or animal instincts, entire communities placed their trust in something else: dogs. Not because dogs were loyal companions, but because many believed they had an unusual ability to sense what humans could not. During a time when fear shaped every decision, people became convinced that dogs could identify evil children, a label often given to those who were simply misunderstood or different. This belief did not start with a single event. Instead, it formed slowly through stories whispered between families, moments of coincidence, and the natural way dogs reacted to unfamiliar situations. If a dog barked too long at a child, people didn't consider whether it was the smell of food, a sudden movement, or mere curiosity. Instead, they claimed the dog sensed something dark within the child's spirit. If a dog growled during a dispute, some adults insisted it was reacting to hidden wickedness. Fear made these assumptions grow quickly. In many communities, life was unpredictable. Diseases spread without explanation, and tragedies struck without warning. Instead of looking for causes, people looked for someone or something to blame. When a family experienced repeated misfortune, neighbors watched the children instead of the adults. If a dog avoided one child more than the others, they said it had confirmed what everyone whispered, but no one dared declare openly. Soon, dogs were deliberately introduced to homes as silent judges. Families would observe how the animal reacted to each child. A nervous dog was described as being warned by the unseen. A dog that hid behind furniture was said to have detected inner corruption. A bark at night directed toward a child's sleeping area could cause panic. And if the dog growled, that reaction alone could follow a child for years. None of this was ever questioned. Adults trusted the dog's behavior more than the child's words. In communities ruled by fear and superstition, normal childhood actions, crying too often, playing alone, refusing instructions, were considered signs that something was wrong. But the belief didn't stop there. It grew into rituals, accusations, and judgment before reason ever had a chance to intervene. And as the superstition gained strength, the dog's reactions were treated like verdicts. The question that still remains is simple but unsettling. Why did entire communities surrender their judgment to an animal? And what did it cost the children who were judged? Inside many households, the belief that dogs could sense evil did more than shape neighborhood gossip. It changed the way families treated their children. At a time when parents relied on tradition more than understanding, even a small reaction from a dog carried enormous weight. A child's future could shift entirely based on a single bark, a moment of hesitation, or an uneasy stare from a family pet. Parents were often overwhelmed by the pressures of survival. Food was scarce, work was exhausting, and people feared bringing shame to their household. So when a dog behaved unpredictably around a child, some adults interpreted it as a warning rather than an accident. They told themselves the animal had detected something dangerous, something they, as parents, had somehow missed. In many homes, the ritual began quietly. A parent would call the family dog into a room where the children sat in a line, each uncertain as to why they were being observed. Parents watched in complete silence. If the dog approached calmly, the child was considered safe. If it paused, sniffed longer than usual, or backed away, adults exchanged anxious glances, believing the dog had exposed a hidden flaw. The worst reaction, growling, brought immediate judgment. Some families separated the child from activities, responsibilities, or even siblings, convinced that caution was necessary. This practice wasn't meant to be cruel. Families believed they were protecting themselves.
Many feared curses, diseases, or misfortunes they couldn't explain. When unexplained events happened, a failed harvest, sudden illness, or financial trouble, parents became even more watchful. They checked the dog's reaction again, hoping for reassurance, yet preparing for fear. Without realizing it, they allowed superstition to overshadow affection. For the children, these moments were confusing. Some tried to sit perfectly still, hoping the dog would not react. Others cried quietly, afraid that any sound might startle the animal and trigger suspicion. A few tried to win the dog's trust with small gestures, only to be scolded for influencing the test. As years passed, this practice became a quiet family tradition, whispered about but rarely questioned. Parents passed the belief down, convinced they were acting responsibly. And the dog, an animal responding only to instinct, hunger, or unfamiliar behavior, became the center of a judgment it never understood. In homes ruled by fear rather than understanding, a simple dog's reaction could reshape a child's life, and it forced one question to linger at the heart of every household. How much suffering came from a belief families thought was protecting them?
Outside the walls of individual homes, villages created their own system, one where a dog's behavior carried more authority than any elder's judgment. These communities believed deeply in omens, and a dog's reaction to a child became a public measurement of innocence, danger, or hidden wrongdoing. What began as private fear inside families slowly turned into a community-wide ritual. It often happened during gatherings. Markets, festivals, and seasonal meetings brought people together, and with them came the village dogs, animals that wandered freely, slipping between crowds, sniffing baskets of food, and circling children at play. Adults watched these moments closely. A simple wag of the tail eased worries. A sudden bark caused murmurs. A growl made a quiet circle form around whatever child the dog reacted to. Over time, these reactions were no longer dismissed as coincidence. Villagers believed dogs were protectors sent to warn them of dangers disguised in the shape of children. They whispered that certain children carried misfortune or attracted spirits or carried tempers they would one day unleash on others. And if a dog reacted unexpectedly, even out of fear, hunger, or confusion, the community believed the animal had sensed what humans could not. Because of this, a child's life could shift with one public moment. A dog barking near them meant fewer invitations, fewer games, fewer shared meals. Some children found themselves avoided by other families who feared inviting misfortune into their homes. Others were spoken about quietly, as though their presence alone could bring unexpected storms, crop failures, or sickness. The community's elders made the situation heavier. They often stepped forward, gathering adults around them to interpret the dog's actions. They claimed the animal's instincts aligned with old warnings and forgotten teachings passed down for generations. Their explanations, spoken with confidence, shaped the way the village saw the child long after the moment had passed. The children, meanwhile, had no control over any of it. Some froze when dogs approached, terrified of being singled out. Others tried to appear brave, but their trembling hands betrayed them. A few looked to their parents for comfort, only to find worry in their eyes. And so the village kept trusting the animals more than understanding the children. The dogs were simply reacting to noise, movement, or unfamiliar scents, but the community read meaning into every twitch and breath. In a world filled with fear and uncertain beliefs, one question grew louder in the minds of those who dared to think differently. How much harm was caused when people trusted instinct over truth and superstition over compassion? As beliefs grew stronger, early healers, those who treated injuries, mixed herbs, and interpreted sickness, began shaping a different explanation for why dogs reacted so sharply to certain children. They argued that the animals were not simply alert or startled, but were sensing something hidden deep inside the child. In their view, dogs were living instruments of detection,
able to identify what healers called disturbed energy, shadowed temperament, or imbalance of spirit. These healers relied heavily on observation and superstition rather than evidence. They believed every child carried a unique internal rhythm, something that determined their future temperament, behavior, and even destiny. When a dog growled at a child, healers interpreted it as a sign of inner disruption, the kind that might later grow into aggression, deception, or unpredictable behavior. And because these healers were respected, their interpretations spread quickly and were rarely questioned. Parents began seeking out these assessments, hoping to learn whether their child carried hidden danger. A dog would be brought into a quiet space, sometimes fed herbs to sharpen its senses, and then released to move freely around the child. Every reaction, ears rising, tail stiffening, hesitation, or avoidance, was taken as symbolic. Even silence could be interpreted negatively, as though the animal were wary of something it could not express. Once a dog reacted, healers often created explanations that sounded scientific but were built entirely on fear. They claimed the child's inner state was leaking into the world, disturbing animals attuned to natural forces. Some healers believed the child's heartbeat changed a dog's breathing. Others thought the child's presence disrupted the dog's instincts. A few went even further, insisting dogs sensed future behavior before it appeared. These early diagnoses carried consequences. A child labeled imbalanced might be kept indoors, hidden from the rest of the community to avoid judgment. Others were subjected to uncomfortable rituals meant to calm the disturbance, involving herbal smoke, cold baths, or long hours of silence. None of these practices had any scientific merit. They were simply attempts to tame fears built on superstition. The dogs, unaware of their role, continued reacting to normal stimuli, sudden movements, unfamiliar scents, or a child's anxious posture. But the healers turned every ordinary reaction into a prediction, shaping the child's reputation long before they understood the world around them. And as these beliefs spread, a troubling question began forming beneath the surface. How many children were forced into lives shaped by fear simply because an animal reacted in a way humans chose to misunderstand? Across different cultures, the meaning behind a dog's reaction to a child shifted from simple fear to something far more symbolic. Some communities believed every child entered the world with an invisible mark, a spiritual imprint that determined their luck, their future, and the energy they carried into their surroundings. This mark wasn't visible to human eyes, but many believed dogs could sense it instantly. In these cultures, dogs were not merely animals, but guardians standing between the human world and the unseen. Their sensitivity, loyalty, and awareness made people think they could recognize forces that slipped past human understanding. When a dog avoided a child, some saw it as a sign the child carried misfortune. When the dog barked, they interpreted it as a warning that the child's spirit was tangled with energies that might cause harm. And when a dog became restless around a child, communities whispered that the mark on that child was stronger than others. This belief influenced customs in quiet but powerful ways. During ceremonies where newborns were introduced to the community, a dog might be allowed to approach the gathering. Adults watched carefully. If the animal walked calmly, it was taken as a blessing. But if it hesitated or shifted its weight nervously, the event became tense. People whispered, mothers held their children tighter. Some families returned home fearing that their child had already been judged by forces they could not control. In some traditions, the dog became a symbolic mirror. Adults believed the animal reflected what they refused to admit about a child's behavior. If a child was shy, fearful, or anxious, a dog's reaction was interpreted as recognition of inner conflict. If a child was loud or unpredictable, a dog's growl was said to reveal uncontrolled energy. These interpretations shaped how children were raised. Some were taught to speak softly, believing their voice carried danger. Others were urged to hide their emotions, fearing they would trigger negative reactions. These cultural beliefs blended fear with tradition until both became impossible to separate. The dogs themselves acted no differently than any household animal, responding to sudden movement, unusual sounds, or unfamiliar scents. But because adults interpreted these reactions through symbolic stories passed down for generations, the meaning became heavier than truth. As these practices continued, one unsettling thought began to emerge. How many cultural traditions were built on misunderstandings that turned ordinary moments into lifelong judgments for children who had done nothing at all?
As beliefs deepened, communities began treating a dog's reaction as more than a warning. It became a justification for punishment. Adults who feared misfortune looked for any explanation to protect themselves, and the idea that dogs could sense darkness in children became a tool to control behavior, shape discipline, and maintain order. What began as superstition slowly turned into a system where children suffered for reactions they did not cause. When a dog barked unexpectedly near a child, adults assumed the worst. They believed the child carried hidden impulses or dangerous thoughts that needed correction. Even if the dog barked simply because it was startled or irritated, the moment turned into evidence of internal trouble. The child might be isolated for days, kept away from gatherings or chores, as adults claimed they were purifying their behavior or calming their influence. None of these practices had logic. They were emotional decisions shaped by fear. Some households introduced rules meant to prevent future reactions. Children were told to walk quietly, speak softly, and avoid any sudden movements near animals. If they laughed too loudly or played too freely, adults worried it would provoke the dogs again, and every new reaction deepened the belief that something was wrong with the child. Innocent habits became reasons for suspicion. A simple mistake became a sign of growing danger. Other communities created rituals meant to counteract the supposed evil influence. Children were made to sit beside fires, breathe herbal smoke, or remain silent for long periods. None of these actions eased fear. Instead, they made children more anxious, which in turn made dogs more reactive, feeding the cycle of misunderstanding. The more uncomfortable a child became, the more adults interpreted it as confirmation of the dog's original judgment. Public punishment also appeared. If a dog growled during a gathering, the child might be removed from the group, not because they had done anything wrong, but because adults feared sharing food, stories, or celebrations with someone the dog had exposed. The child often stood apart, watching others participate, while they waited for approval they had no way to earn. These punishments shaped childhoods and futures. Many children grew up believing something was wrong with them because of an animal's instinctive reaction. Others felt unwanted, confused, or ashamed without understanding why. And through it all, the dogs simply responded to unfamiliar scents, nervous movements, or environmental noise, the same way they always had. Fear, however, made those reactions larger than life. It turned normal animal behavior into accusations and innocent children into targets of suspicion. And beneath the surface, a haunting question grew. How much damage was done when adults punished children not for their actions, but what they believed an animal had revealed? As time passed, the beliefs surrounding dogs and their supposed ability to sense evil in children created consequences that lasted far beyond childhood. The judgments placed on these children did not fade quickly. Many grew up carrying a label they never understood, shaped by a reaction they never controlled. And because adults treated those moments as predictions rather than misunderstandings, the fear continued long after the dog's bark was forgotten. Children who were once singled out often internalized the warnings spoken around them. They walked with caution, avoided attention, and learned to monitor every expression and movement, worried that anything they did might be interpreted as confirmation of the dog's instinct. This pressure affected their confidence, their voice, and even the way they interacted with others. What began as superstition quietly became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Some withdrew so deeply that adults believed it proved the animal had been right all along. Others responded differently. A few grew frustrated, tired of being treated as if danger lived inside them. They pushed against the restrictions placed on them, not because of anything the dog had sensed, but because of the constant suspicion that surrounded them. Yet even this resistance was used as justification for the label they had been given. Every raised tone, every moment of emotion became evidence. Adults rarely recognized that the child's behavior was shaped by social pressure rather than hidden darkness. This belief affected families as well. Parents lived with the fear that the dog's reaction had marked their child's future. They became overly protective or overly strict, trying to prevent the child from fulfilling a fate they believed was already determined. Some parents limited friendships, avoided celebrations, or declined visits to other households, worried the child might trigger another reaction that would deepen the community's suspicions. Even when children grew into adulthood, the memory lingered. The label followed them in quiet conversations, in subtle glances, and in the cautious way others approached them. Some carried the weight silently, shaping their future relationships and choices. It affected the way they raised their own families, the way they viewed themselves, and the way they understood their place in the world. What still stands out is how easily normal animal behavior was turned into lifelong judgment. A moment of barking, growling, or hesitation became a defining mark on a child's identity. And all of it came from fear, fear that transformed instinct into prophecy and misunderstanding into truth. And it leaves one final question that echoes long after the story ends. If you were a child in that era, would you have lived your life being who you truly were, or who others believed a dog said you were?